this then is, and I don't think we can get at it by returning up here, but we can try. We can try this just to see. Return this. Let's see. The thing is, like, we can't. This is just an anonymous function, and where are you going to store a value in that anonymous function? But I'll try. Okay, well, we could try it. Let's see how it goes.
Well, I'm just more curious because, like, you know, if you have a function with this error, how it's return result.
It does, yeah. So now I'm just saying return this result. Okay, and now we'll do it.
You might.
I think we're okay.
Well, the regular database might not have.
Got it. Okay.
So you may need to insert the regular database first.
Should we?
If you go into insert queries and just uncomment that, run it once, and then recomment it again, and then we should keep it.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
that's okay, but
that's
it's successfully coded. So we'll just try it.
And then what you didn't know.
Oh, it returned a promise.
Yeah. So it didn't return the value.
It didn't return that value. Yeah. So, yeah, but just for code style and definitely for testing, I would recommend doing this a different way. So let's just make sure that and instead of making this an anonymous function, here sort of there then I would actually take this and I would say okay, and then give it a and so and now I think we can return this.
Which, yeah, that's a promise, which will return true or false. Yeah. Catch error.
Okay. So, and now if we say return check password, now this anonymous function is returning check password, which is not really what we need because, although it might be because we're only one level.
Although I have a question.
Yeah.
So the way we're invoking these, we're going to pass this the text, the values, and the password we want, and then here it's going to so it's going to, with that password, be able to pull out the email and password from the database.
Mm-hmm.
But then we're going to run this check password. If you return it, won't you then have to pass it password and DB password? Then right there, yeah. So that way we have the same password basically.
Right.
And then that will be DB password from there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this password would be the same as this password if we did it that way.
Right.
Yeah. So that way you can continue on.
Yeah.
Like
So now.
We'll go over some code.
Sure. What do you want to do?
Let's
Let me shoot you a GitHub real quick. We'll swap.
all right. Let's see how we're doing here. I'm still like a little bit out of my depth. All right. So now if we do this, let's try again. No, it's still just giving us the pending promise. So,
But then it's what is it, console log? Sorry. Was that just the rows? Yeah, okay. That was just the rows. Oh, yeah, that was from the
ROWS, not
Oh.
they're starting we need to move, unless you want to watch this and continue later.
Hey, John. How you doing?
Just shot you a little DM.
This one? Ugh. Anyone else have anything they want to talk about?
Can we talk about like a general approach to reading documentation? It's really, I don't know, like how do you approach a documentation of the technology that you're going to be starting to use?
Okay, I'll see what I can come up with for that.
I would just, as I'm going through learning all of the different CSS methodologies like Fluxbox and Grid and all that, just kind of like a general, how do you decide what you're going to implement? Like what would be like your approach to seeing like a mockup or a wireframe and being like, I think this is all solution.
Hmm.
You know, it's kind of,
Oh my god, I have the hiccups. It's the worst. All right. Anything else? Okay, cool. We will probably end up reading some documentation, so we'll get to that. Ugh, Jesus. What is this thing, Swapper?
Swapper. It's a little program where you can basically plug in little sentences with identifiers, like say you want to have a little story prompt with like people that are consistent, things like that. You can type in brackets person 1, person 2.
Mm-hmm.
We'll swap those out for actual people that are placed in a list.
Okay.
It's
All right.
super quick usage.
So your package gives you a swapper bin, which runs this thing. You've got some utilities. Interesting. This is interesting. So your script only does something when it's given no arguments. It looks like.
No arguments.
Oh no, sorry. When it's only given one argument, and the second argument is undefined. What's up with this? Why do we want that? What is that for?
Seems strange to me, actually. I might have been messing with things.
Because if I just run swapper, got prompt undefined, something went wrong, getting unique identifier. So how am I supposed to run this thing?
So go ahead and type up some quotes. There you go.
Well, I'm not sure what that means. Type up some quotes.
So the example input prompts there.
Like this one?
If you go
Or
to the
this
line
one?
5, that's an exact usage.
So I do that.
Yeah. And it should give you back.
Interesting. Okay.
Is that making sense?
Yeah, it's just not clear to me why we need this. So we get some utilities, and then we get our input string, which is then later being used down here to like match against some things. And then, so down here, it seems like this just means if I put something here, nothing's going to happen, because you're saying is the second input undefined.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like you want to do this no matter what, right? You want to run this every time.
I might have put that in for some weird testing thing.
Okay.
As I'm not sure why I did that.
Well, because so now if I put an extra argument, it still does the same thing. Okay.
I might have been thinking about error handling, but thanks for pointing that out.
Sure.
I'm not sure why that's there in retrospect.
So where does like Sarah and Sarah? or
Those are going to
Lisa
be
and
in
Bruce?
swap lists under swap list.json.
Got it.
So anything
Interesting.
you add there as a key,
I see.
you'll be able to use as an identifier, and it'll automatically change those to lowercase, so you can plug them in either as lowercase things or
Sure.
uppercase, lowercase things.
All right. Well, is there anything you want me to go over more on this thing that you've read? Is there like a bug or a question you have about it, or you just want general feedback?
So what I'm curious about is right now it can do like person, place, and thing.
Yeah.
These are all nouns.
Okay.
It's going to check for those. I'm wondering, so what if I wanted to put noun instead and have it search through those same lists and go, okay, I want to pull one of these from one of these lists that is person, place, or thing.
I mean, it looks like you're just using a regular expression to find bracket something number, and then that something person, right, is mapped to this. So I could put like, can I come in here and do like place 1? Yeah, junior college, great.
And then if you
So it seems like that you're already doing that.
So what I'm wondering is, like, say for instance I wanted to use like noun 1. I don't want to add another entry to the JSON that's noun that has all of the things from person, place, or thing. So I'm wondering if there's.
So I don't understand. You want to add like just noun, just any noun 1,
and have it reference what already exists here in the JSON.
Okay. So what does build regex do?
That just gets the regex string to look for things that are between brackets with a number.
Yeah, I see.
The work is mostly done in get swap item.
What work?
Where it actually takes in like the category of thing, depending on what you gave it, person, place, or thing.
Oh, well then you could come in here and you could say like another if statement. You could say if swap category equals noun, then yeah, something like that. You could make a special case that just says if it equals noun, then you would do something like object dot values dot, I don't know, you want to concat all those arrays together, right? Does that make sense?
That could, I didn't think about that at all.
And then you could just get an array of join where those 3 arrays in your data here are all joined together, and then just use that as your swap list object.
Okay.
Something like that.
Awesome. Cool.
I think a lot of this is lost on the other folks, so unless there's some specific things you want to look at, I'm going to move on to the next thing.
Okay.
I
might have some more questions later.
Cool. Sweet. So how to build a mockup in HTML and CSS. Do you have one in mind that you've looked at?
I mean, I've started working on the full project, and like I did the front page and Flexbox, and now I'm going to do some of the other pages in Grid just to kind of see the differences. So maybe.
Sure. I don't know how to answer this question. How do I do a mockup? I would take, I need an example mockup. Let's see. Spell that wrong. It's more of like a wireframe that you'll be given. So this is kind of a cool wireframe that you might get from someone. This version of it. Oh God. So there's like a lot that can go into this answer, and it really depends on the tools that your website is already using. So most of the time when someone gives you a wireframe like this, you're not going to be building this from scratch. You're going to be doing this in the context of an existing website, right? So if someone gave us this page and was like, build this, we could actually kind of see how this would be different depending on the website that we're looking at. If we try to follow the styles, right? If we go, like, you can imagine kind of how this would look if it was LinkedIn versus Facebook, right? You're gonna have different colors, different fonts, different line heights, different paddings, different spaces. So a lot of a wireframe is really meant to just communicate to you, like, of the existing tools, here's like a mock-up of what a page should look like. Try to identify that, like, this big image with a gray box at the bottom, or the video player, or, you know what I mean? These things are going to be part of the visual vocabulary. God, go away. Part of the visual vocabulary of your website. So that's why a lot of the times you'll see like wireframes that are just drawn up like this, right? Because it's just meant to say, like, you as a developer should already be a little bit familiar with, you know, the calendar widget that we have, or what the logo looks like next to text, or what a general H1 or H2 header is going to look like. So I don't need to tell you, right? And that's why you'll see things like Balsamic and stuff go out of their way to generate like squiggly line stuff, or just like not polished on purpose looking stuff, kind of like this. Because that's meant to convey to you that, like, what you're seeing here isn't exactly what you should be creating, right? You shouldn't be creating this squiggly line. This is like, I drew this by hand. You should extrapolate out that this is something that already exists, or if not, get into the details with the local designer that you're working with to figure out exactly what it's supposed to look like. Sometimes you will work places where they're going to give you like a pixel perfect sort of screenshot, right? And you can do that for yourself by, I don't know, you know, there's one of these where like there's one module that's like, go try to rebuild the like purchase page from Try Caviar, right? So I could give you like a PDF of this, right? I could just print this to PDF right now. And then this would be a pixel perfect sort of PDF, which again, you need to like extrapolate out, like what does it look like when it's mobile sized? How do things wrap, right? You need to assume that like these food items are gonna wrap around and stuff. So it's never gonna be pixel perfect exactly. But if someone gave me this and was like, try to build this, I would start by creating a general sort of personal wireframe for how this page would look, right? So here, I'll print this as a PDF. Oh, that's not going to help. I'll just screenshot it. And so I would come in here and I would say, okay, I know that the first thing I notice is that everything's wrapped in a single column here, right? There's this concept of like this middle column in the page, and it's got some width, and that's probably going to change based on like responsive media queries. So as the page shrinks, that column is going to shrink. So I know I need something like that. If it wasn't for this background picture extending out, I might just wrap the entire page in an outer column. But since I know that we actually are probably going to, we're going to need this to be a single element so we can put a background image on it that's consistent. So I know I'm going to need like, let me try to mark this thing up. So I know from looking at this that like, I'm probably going to start with a header element. So this will be my first box, is like some sort of nav bar or header element, right? And within that, I know I'm going to need one of those columns. So within the header, I know that I'm going to have an inner box that's like something like this. And that's probably going to have a class name that's shared by another element that is you know, doesn't have a border, so it's not as easy to see. You can't really visualize, but it's used for alignment. That's going to be the exact same width of that page column width, right? And I'm going to use that same class name probably to come down here and put all of this inside of the column, right? So I'm starting to now I'm only doing this because I have I'm choosing I'm making these choices just out of experience, right? When I get into the details and I start to build this could be a totally wrong or flawed or failed attempt at this, and I may have to start again, and I may have to try a different technique or a different attempt. But this is kind of generally how I start. I start with, since everything is generally a rectangle, I start with drawing those rectangles. So if we actually go to trycaviar.com, I like this little trick. This obviously isn't useful for you if it's a mockup, but just to give you an idea, if you come in here and you hit this plus to add a style, you can put a style on every element by saying star, and you can say outline 1 pixel dotted red or something, and you can kind of get where I'm going here, where I've said every element on the page is surrounded by a red border. It's not really a border, it's an outline. And so you can see what I'm going for when I draw this is something like this. Is like, you can see this box here, this header has an element in it that constrains its width to keep it the same width and centered. Same thing with this box here. And same thing with this box here. And then again, there's this box here. Even though there's some content overflowing outside of it, you can see that that's probably how they implemented this page. Is that, so that's where I start. Is I start drawing like, okay, I'm gonna have, how's my tree gonna look? Well, I'm gonna have to have this header followed by, I don't know, a top image or whatever you want to call it, right? And then followed by maybe like a delivery status thing. So maybe this actually is probably going to be down here, and we're going to have, you know, obviously this is our second outer box here, and then we've got another one down here. So now I'm thinking like, okay, the top of my tree is going to be like, is going to be probably 4 divs. It's going to be the body, and then header, top image, delivery info, and then, you know, the order box is everything after it or whatever, right? So I don't know if those are good class names, but I would start there, and then as I started building out the components of my page, I'd try to refactor and rename things and find duplicate styles and try to pull those into a shared class name or something like that. And I would just start by drawing like, okay, what's consistent? Well, there's going to be a lot of these, right? So this looks like a shared component. This idea that like there's an image with a description and a name and a price, right? That right there, that's a consistent thing. So I'm going to define, I know I'm going to probably put that into like some sort of partial template or some sort of reusable template thing so that I can just plug the data in and get the same HTML out that's going to use consistent class names. So I might give this a name like, you know, orderable food item or something like that. I don't know. And then there's some other consistencies like some sort of section that contains many of these. And that section is going to define like how they wrap, right? So then that's a component that there's going to be more than one of. There's a bowls section and a sandwiches section, right? So I'm starting to find like, what's the reoccurring patterns? How can I give those a name so that I can reduce the complexity, right? Of what I have to build. Is this helping?
Yeah, no, this is helpful because I mean I built like a lot of really hacky HTML CSS stuff.
Sure.
But it's like, you know, I want to hear like from somebody who has done this professionally, like what's your thought process to start this off? Like how do you organize this?
Yeah. I estimate that I could build this page with, given the right images, let's say a static version of this page just as a first pass. I could probably do this in a couple hours. And the reason I say that is because I've been doing CSS for more than a decade. I've been specializing in front-end development for most of my career. I've done a lot of HTML and CSS. I've spent a lot of time trying to understand the quirks and the weirdnesses and sort of learn to love this really unintuitive, awkward way to decide what the pixels are on the screen. And I still, even if I sat down right now and live coded like building this for you, would have to play around with different CSS techniques, Maybe I'd use grid, maybe I'd use Flexbox. I'd probably try Flexbox first, but that's just me, right? So if you find yourself having to sort of play around with different CSS techniques before you quite get what you're after, I think you will be doing that for a long time. Unless you learn something that I've managed to not learn in the last, about CSS and HTML that makes it click for you. I hope that's true. I know some people who are better at this than I am, and maybe they know some, you know what I mean? But like, I think that because of the nature of HTML and CSS and how unintuitive a lot of the options and tools that we have for deciding where these boxes go, you have to play around with like, should I use padding? Should I use margin? Should I be using floats? Should I be absolute positioning? Should I be using Flexbox? It's just such a laundry list of tools, right? This wasn't a system that was like really designed by, it was really designed by committee, right? This is a system that is not designed by like, it's not a product someone's trying to sell. If it was, it'd make more sense how this stuff worked. But unfortunately, it's organically grown over time, and we've just been sort of adding better versions of tools, right? So in order to get these things in order to get these things to like flow next to each other, before Flexbox and things like grid, we'd have to use floats. We don't have to use floats now because we have Flexbox was designed to sort of replace this tool this hacky tool that we had been using for a long time, right? So a lot of the tools overlap. So often it's unclear. Like you'll find a guide that tells you how to make something like this using floats, and you'll find one that does Flexbox, and you don't know which one the right answer is, right? So my encouragement to you is to really get used to playing around with stuff in the developer tools. Like as you're developing, if you can't figure out like how to get these things to flow quite like this, really get used to coming in here and trying different stuff and like adding styles and turning on and off styles, and really get used to debugging, I guess, to sort of stabbing around in the dark trying to find the solution that works in your CSS. Because I think due to the nature of how unintuitive a lot of these tools are, just raw hours of playing with it and hours of trying to implement something in 5 or 6 different ways and seeing what's possible with CSS, it's just going to be a 10,000 hours kind of thing here. I think you're just going to have to put in the time to play around with. Because I think the wireframe that I drew is going to work. I think Flexbox is going to work for me to like build these things, but I might find out that there's some quirk about it that doesn't quite get me where I want to go, and I got to try some different technique. And then another word of advice I'll give around that is really be disciplined about focusing on one thing that you're trying to solve and getting that solution, building that solution. So for example, like when we build this component here that's duplicated across this page, this orderable item component, make sure that you build this thing in a way that as you're playing around trying to tweak things to get it, that when you finally get something that works, that you save that change, commit it with a temporary git commit or whatever, and then go through and make sure that every style that you've defined is actually necessary. Because one of the pitfalls I find is that we'll be kind of adding styles and removing them and sort of playing around, and then we'll get it to work, and then we'll just like leave it alone because you don't want to break it, right? And so that's going to get you in trouble a lot sometimes, because you'll have some styles in there that you think are being applied, or you think that they're relevant, and they're actually not. And sometimes those unrelated styles are going to have a side effect that breaks some child element or breaks some smaller thing. So just like when you're doing your tests, when you get a passing test, you want to go back and look at your code and make sure that your test breaks appropriately. Go break the code and make sure the test. Go into your CSS and say, okay, Flexbox is what's making things align this way. Let's prove that to myself by asking the computer, by turning off the Flexbox. So go in. I don't actually know if they're using Flexbox, but go in here, and find this surrounding element, and then like turn off flex wrap and turn off all the, and see what happens when you turn these styles off, and make sure that they're actually doing what you think that they're doing, right? Because of the cascading nature of CSS and how things cascade down, you may be throwing a style on an element that you don't need, that again is having some side effect lower down the tree that can cause you to have to sort of undo that side effect, right? So that's another way to that's something I highly recommend you do is really make sure that And another thing you can do is just kick this HDMI cord right out of your computer. Is build things if possible, right? So if you're like, okay, I want to build this component, you could try building this component on its own page by itself with nothing else. And then once it's the way that it's supposed to look, use that component within a greater context of a page, like render a partial template or something like that. And if it doesn't display correctly, that's a good indication that something higher up is some style higher up is cascading down. That's putting margin you didn't expect or something like that, right? Cool. That's all I can think of.
Can you also talk about pre-compiler CSS, like sass, stuff like that? Should we aim to use it, or should we stick to?
Sure. And then Helen, you wanted to talk about the addEventListener versus node.onclick equals versus. There's these three strategies for defining event listener. Okay, cool. Let's do reading documentation next. So what is do you have an example of some documentation that you want to look at, or?
Yeah, well, we can look at chai or something more complicated. I guess my question is, what's your strategy to find what you're looking for very fast?
Yeah. Well, I mean, usually docs for everything are different. Not everything has a unified documentation system. So oftentimes I just use Google, and I don't even really go straight to the docs. But sometimes I'll go to the docs when I don't know what I'm looking for. So like I know that I'm not sure how to Google it, right? So like I know like within the expect syntax of chai that there's something about like throwing an error. So I might just search like, you know, chai should throw error, and then I don't even really go to the docs, or here, this takes me here, and this might be your experience, right? You look for chai should throw error. How do I do that? Oh, look, the docs for chai. I go here, and I'm at the top of the docs for chai, and there's like nothing here relevant to the thing that I searched, right? So you probably want to search for like throw on this page or something, and look, there's a section for throw. That's an annoying thing that often happens. So if you search for like node read file, you're going to come here, and you're going to see the node.js docs are here. So I click on that, and now I'm at the top of this page, and it's, again, irrelevant to what I searched for. So you might want to search for read file or read space file or something like that, because often these docs don't, like often docs tend to be all one big page. And so you'll have to just search within that page. A trick you can do is you can do like read file. You can do some search term and then cite : and some specific URL. And I think Google will search that page, and you can see that it found a result for read file. But when I go there, yeah, it doesn't take me there. Okay, I was hoping that it would be smarter than that. But be aware that like the cite : and then some website is a way for you to tell Google to like just search that one page or that one website, and that might help in searching through docs as well. But honestly, like how I've gotten faster at reading or at finding the answer to my questions in reading docs is just getting good at search terms. It's just figuring out like what's the appropriate search term to scan this page, right? So if we wanted to find out how to like compare two arrays on this page, what would we search for?
Two arrays equal something like that.
So that's too specific, right? But if we just search for the word array, we can kind of scan through and be like, okay, to be an array, I learned that. What was that one? So here we go. Expect this array to include members. That's cool. I didn't even know about that. So yeah, I think it's too specific to imagine what the sentence would be on this page, but we know it's going to contain the word array. We could also just search for like left bracket and kind of fast scan through here and just get used to just scanning through things and looking for stuff. Another thing is if we search for something and it ends up on something like a Stack Overflow, I usually skip the question and I just go straight to the first top-rated answer. And I usually don't read anything but the code, right? Because like I can understand, I'm familiar enough with this syntax that like I can just quickly scan through and see what's relevant, and I'm really not paying attention to any of the paragraphs, right? Like this code is expressive enough to me that I can read that and kind of get a sense of what it does. And if I don't understand it, I'm like, what does that most mean? Maybe they'll give me a paragraph to clarify or something. But usually I'm just, whenever I land on a resource, I'm just looking at the code. So how to test throwing an error node. I'm hoping that'll hit Stack Overflow. So like, I really never read that. I just come down here and I just look like, what's this person's answer? Assert.throws. Great, maybe I'll try that. Or maybe this answer's, usually I find out from the top-rated answer whether or not the question was even relevant to what I was looking for, or whether the answer is good enough for what I'm looking for. But my only recommendation for how to get better at reading docs and code is to read docs and code. Like, you're writing a lot of code and you're learning to write different things, but I wonder what your ratio of reading code to writing code is.
I write most of the time. I don't really read a lot.
Yeah. I would recommend a minimum of 2x read to write, if not 10 times reading than writing. So, for example, if you are aware of some small modules or code examples within the stuff you're playing with, right? We happen to be doing a lot of Express and Node. And a Node makes this easy. Go read the code for Express. Maybe you won't understand it, but you're gonna get exposed to a lot of things you've never seen before. And then hopefully that code will give you some ideas of what to Google to further understand that code. But just like read stuff, read code that's out there. Because the more you read code, the more you're gonna be like, you're gonna realize, oh, you can do it that way. Oh, you can do it that way. Oh, you can do it 8 different ways. And then you'll start to realize where more flexibility within programming is than you're currently aware of. And you're gonna see how, quote unquote, the professionals do it, right? Or quote unquote, how a incredibly successful library writes their code. For better or for worse. I mean, maybe Express could be written better, probably. Who knows what that means? That's at one point, right? But it's certainly popular, and you can't argue with that. So jQuery, one of the most popular, arguably the most popular JavaScript library of all time, go read the code. It's going to show you how to interact with the DOM in a way that you probably never interacted with before, and it's going to show you how to like set up a library in a way that you've never read before, right? So again, you don't have to grok all of it, but just like, you know, spend 1 hour a day reading through a laundry list of modules and code that will expose you to some new things. Cool. And then also just reading docs. Like if you like they're all different, right? Like look at the docs between like Node and jQuery, 2 very popular JavaScript packages. They're just very different, right? This breaks things up into an organizational pattern. So like if I wanted to get better at jQuery, I'd probably just in my free time in the evening, laying on my couch, just scan through the docs and be like, okay, what's this deferred object thing? I have no idea what this is. Maybe I'll go into the terminal in my browser and load up jQuery and play with it. And you know what I mean? So like you'll get a sense of like, you know, what you can and cannot get from docs. One of the major problems with docs is they assume you know stuff, right? So you land on a page and it's like, fs read file, it reads a file and takes a callback. And you're like, what the fuck's a callback, right? And it's not gonna help you find that answer. You're gonna have to go find that answer on your own, right? Because, but the converse, it would be super, super annoying if every time you read a recipe, they were like, chop an onion, take the knife, press it into the onion over and over. You know what I mean? It's like if you don't know how to chop an onion, you got to go figure out how to do that. The docs aren't going to tell you every time there's a recipe, right? If you don't know what a tablespoon is, you're kind of out of luck, right? So Google is your best friend, right? You're going to want to figure that. That's like the #1 skill that if you get good at finding what you want to know on the internet, I can't imagine a better skill. I can't imagine a more valuable skill in any career is finding what you want to know, right? So it's all about keywords and getting good at Googling. And then reading the docs is just about training your brain to scan for the parts that are relevant to you and ignore the parts that are irrelevant. And that, I think, just takes practice. Sweet. So this is an interesting one that popped up in Slack, and folks were talking about like which one is the best answer. So I want to show you the difference here. I did not watch the video. Well, it's okay. I'll give you my perspective, and you do what you want to do. So I'm going to make an HTML and JavaScript file here. And I'll just load this sucker up here.
Why do you do the instant server versus just like throwing the file directly into the browser?
That's a good question. So I will show you. So here, I've just thrown it into the browser, and I'm doing like file : / and look at my path. It's just like huge and long, right? Versus here, I'm just at the home page, right? So here, let me show you what the difference is going to be for this as I do this. So I want to, basically the short answer is I want to be able to link my assets with absolute URLs. Okay? So in here I'll just put alert.js file loaded so we know that this file got loaded. So if I load it here, it gets loaded. And that's because if we look at this HTML that I wrote, it's /index.js. So if I just come up here and do /index.js, that works, right? But it doesn't work from here because /index.js means file : / index.js, which is not. So the short answer is that file : / does not accurately mimic what it's like to be a page on a web server. The file : / context has different security issues. It's actually more tightly locked down in terms of what it can talk to. It can't make any AJAX requests from a file : //. So I just am in the habit of trying to get as close to being on a web server with a domain as possible. And this is weird and not how the web works at all, really. It works a little bit different, but like for other reasons, I'm in the habit of always putting my assets at an absolute URL. And this is because if this page wasn't at / and it was at /about /team /index.html, then this would still work because it's just, I don't care where you are. It's not a relative path, right? Whereas if I wanted to get it to work with file : / I'd have to put like a dot here so it knew it was a relative path. And then ./index.js on about team means about team index.js, and it's not there, right? So it's about that. Cool. Okay, let's talk about event listeners. There are 3 ways. Strategy 1 will be we create a button and we say onClick equals on button click. So that's strategy 1. Strategy 2. Will be here, and strategy 3 will be here. So strategy 1 is just you put a you reference a global variable in your HTML, and you just call that function. Strategy 2 is, and strategy 3 are both done in JavaScript. Strategy. And this will be button 3. So let me get this JS down here. And we're going to say, I'm going to move my script tag down to the bottom here so I don't have to worry about DOM ready stuff. If that doesn't make sense, just ignore it for now because I want to focus on the event listeners. So this one we need to define a function named onButtonClick. And we'll just console log button 1 clicked. And let's just make sure that strategy 1 works. So I'll come over here. And I click button 1. And we see in the console. What is this? How do I make this go away? There we go. We see in the console that button 1 was clicked. Yeah? So that works, right? We can also just call this global variable whenever we want. Yeah, because it's just a global function. Okay. Strategy 2 is you actually go find the thing in document. Strategy 2 and 3 both use the get the node in JavaScript, however you want. You might do a query selector for button 2. You might do like a jQuery deal like that. You might do a find by class name, I think, is another one, or query by class name. But there's a bunch. But they'll all do the same thing and then eventually get you a node that represents that DOM. So we'll call this button 2, and then this is going to be button 3. In the second strategy, strategy 2, we are just going to define a onClick equals right here. We're going to put a function on it. Okay. In strategy 3, we're going to say addEventListener for a click event with an inline function that takes an event. Oh, I think this one will also take an event. And then we'll console.log button 3 clicked, and here's the event. So in strategy 2, we're assigning a property onto the DOM object that represents this button, button 2. And in strategy 3, we're using an addEventListener function to give a callback for when this event is triggered. Okay, so let's see that these all work. Button 1, button 2, and button 3. Okay, all strategies will work. No other tools are required. Vanilla JavaScript in the browser, you can set up or write code that will respond to a click event on these elements through an attribute, through a property on the DOM element in JavaScript, or through adding an event listener. All 3 work, right? Is this in line with what you were? Yep.
It works, but in the video it mentioned that addEventListener is a lot faster because it's built in natively, whereas it has like some native code, like the browser uses code in like a native language, and I don't know, but I will.
Yeah, I will look at that video, and I don't know if maybe there was a misunderstanding or maybe that video has incorrect information, but everything that you're seeing here, HTML, JavaScript, that's all I've written for this, is as native to the browser as the word native could mean, I think, right? The browser's job, it's one of its main jobs, is to parse and display HTML and to execute JavaScript and to provide JavaScript with a DOM API for the document object model, right? So there's nothing about this code that I think is going to change very much with performance. I did send you a link to someone who did do like a JS perf performance evaluation versus doing like 1 million of these versus 1 million of these versus like 1 million of these, and they probably found some averaged performance change. I don't think that's what should motivate you here for picking a strategy. I don't think the performance difference between these are going to be so much so that your users will notice. Okay? The reason I recommend strategy 3 is two reasons. This one, which is like a philosophical one, which is just that you should, well, okay. The philosophical side of this is that I don't like strategy 1 because it breaks 2 rules that I like to live by in my web development, which is that I keep my behavior, my JavaScript behavior, separate from the DOM as a display setting. This talks about what the page should look like and what the user should see. It doesn't have to talk about what behaviors should happen when certain user interactions happen. Right, so we sort of keep our data in HTML, our display of that data in CSS, and our interactivity of that data in JavaScript. It's nice to be able to keep those things separate, so I know where to go. If there's something, so in other words, if I'm on a website and I'm working on a feature or I'm fixing a bug or whatever, and I want to figure out what happens when I click this. Where's the code that handles I clicked this button? Where is that handled, right? I don't want to have to look both in my JavaScript and my HTML. I'd rather just look in one place. So let's just not use strategy 1. Also, strategy 1 requires a bunch of global variables get defined, which are polluting our global namespace, which can cause problems and bugs. So and for that reason as well, I wouldn't use strategy 1. Okay? Strategy 2 has a huge limitation, which is that if I want 2 click handlers, I can't do that. I'll overwrite the previous one. I only get 1 click handler. So for that, I don't like strategy 2. I like strategy 3 because it is something that 2 completely separate parts of my code can bind to an event on the same DOM node, and they're unaware of each other. Okay? So in this example, if I wanted to, if this was some part of my code and this was some separate part of my code, right? Maybe, you know, I don't know. Maybe 2 things need to happen that are totally separate from each other on the same button press or something. Or more likely it's gonna, well, anyway, you can imagine why I might want 2 of these. Without some additional intelligence, and by that I mean more code here, I wouldn't be able to get 2 handlers. Okay, this is the same problem is here with document onload, right? So the thing that was added to solve this was just the fact that everything is an event, and you should just listen for whenever those events get emitted. So now we can have 2. We can have as many as we want here that get fired. And they get fired in order, so we still can have an order to our code, and we can still be sure that, like, this thing happens before that thing. But this idea that you have, like, a place where events can be emitted, like this button or some other DOM node, right? This button is a place where events can be emitted, and we'll subscribe to those events. And there's a bunch of different kinds of events that can happen. That idea, that way to structure your code is actually really powerful and used a lot in JavaScript. So it's another reason why I think you should get comfortable with doing it here. So, I mean, I think that's it. I think that's my spiel on why I think strategy 3 is like the right answer or the best answer. But what's really going on here is that there are trade-offs. And in my opinion, the downsides to this are far outweighed by their benefits, right? I can get everything I need out of strategy 3, and there's nothing that strategy 1 and 2 provide for me that I want. That doesn't mean you don't want it. Some people might like this approach. They like knowing that I can go into the markdown and see what's going to happen, and the fact that you have 100 global variables is fine for you, and that's a preference. That's a team preference thing. It's just not where I would want to work. Yeah.
That'd be like an okay thing if it's like a small, basically like one self-contained web page.
I mean, that question really is another way of saying like what can I get away with? What's sustainable in the long term? And if I'm building an application, so for, you know, a number of times in my career, I've been asked to build parts of web pages that are just going to be there for the weekend. Like some folks are going to a conference and we want /AwesomeCon to be a page that has some, so I'll just shit that thing out. That thing is going to be super ugly. It's going to have all kinds of potential bugs. It's going to be really hard to read. It's not going to be well formatted because I don't care if that thing lives on. I know it's going to be around for the weekend and we're going to throw it away. And so I'm not going to waste my time polishing something that we're going to throw away, right? But most of the stuff we work on is stuff that we expect to live around, or at least we have no idea when it's going to not have to be maintained, right? And so if we're going to build things that we have to keep in our house and maintain and dust and on all that stuff, we want it to be well made, right? So if I'm going to live in an apartment for a week, probably not going to buy a lot of furniture for it. So it's that same kind of thing, right? So there's this flexibility and this range of polish or quality or care or craftsmanship, and you get to decide how crappy this chair that you need for one day can be, or a chair that you want to sit in for the rest of your life, right? You get to decide how well you want to make that thing. And it's all about trade-offs, right? So this is, if I was feeling lazy and I could type this in and get it to work and move on and get on to my next task, I might do that, right? So, but while we're here learning and practicing, we might as well be practicing the things that are going to be a simulation of high craftsmanship quality work, right? So definitely format your code as well as you can, even though you might throw it away or it's never going to get executed again, right? Because you're in the mode of where you want to make sure that, like, when you want that chair for the rest of your life, you know how to sand it right or whatever, right? You know how to write quality code, right? Yeah.
I noticed when you were going through this, you moved the script down to the bottom so that the bottom will load first.
Mhm.
Is there often times that we're doing like pre-non-loading work where where it's, I guess, has been standardized that script is loaded at that
Sure.
first stage?
Sure. Yeah, so it's like it's all trade-offs, right? So if I put my script, this is a different thing now than event handlers. If I put my script at the bottom here, these DOM elements have already been added to the DOM, so these queries will work. They'll return an element, right? That was the reason I put it at the bottom. If I put my script at the top here, you'll see that none of this works. Well, the strategy 1 will still work, but strategy 2 and 3 do not work. They actually throw an error because this is null, and you can't assign onClick to null, right? So in this case, for this code, I don't need anything to happen. Well, I'll say the trade-off is, as this document is being sent from the server to the browser, this information will get there sooner, a little bit sooner. Maybe if this page was 7 megabytes of text or 50 megabytes of text, it might get there way later, seconds later. Who knows, right? But this is going to get there sooner if it's at the top, which will allow the browser to do a parallel HTTP request for this resource. And it's actually a blocking operation. So we'll still receive this information, but we're not going to process anything in this document until this code is executed completely, right? So it gives you an earlier opportunity to do some things like ask for more assets, require more resources, or send off an AJAX request to go get some data or something. That's going to happen as soon as possible, right? So you might eke out some more milliseconds, right? So in most of my applications, the thing I land on is just putting my script tag after my style sheets, and then just wrapping any DOM code that I have in another usage of addEventListener, where we're saying when the DOM ready event is fired, when the document's content is loaded, then do this. So now I can have my script tag at the top, and all of these buttons should work.
I guess my question is like, what?
Oh, haha, except for this one, because this is not a global variable anymore. So strategy 1 needs to be out of here. What was your question?
Standard before the addEventListener, I guess the stuff that you'd be doing before the DOM loads is like cookie handling and things like that. Like what type of stuff do you normally do?
Yeah, the only reason that I've experienced that I can think of at the moment why I'd want to put my script tag at the top was for, again, loading that asset faster. Generally, your JavaScript is huge. It's a lot of stuff. Like Facebook's JavaScript is like megabytes and megabytes of data, right? So you want to get that downloading faster, and that only applies to the cold load, right? To the first time visiting. If I go to the page again, that shit's cached, so it's not a big optimization at that point.
But then again, the only things I can think of is you want to fire an AJAX request, or you want to dynamically inject more script tags into the page, or more asset requiring things like image tags or link tags for CSS. You want to inject more. So sometimes like, you know, so for example, Google Analytics is a service that folks use, and their strategy is they ask you to put a script tag at the top, and all that script tag does is dynamically inject another script tag. And the reason they do that is because that dynamically injected script tag is loaded asynchronously. It's a little bit of a hack to say, here's a synchronous script tag, load this, but all it does is this tiny thing where it injects an async script tag, which goes and gets a different script, right? So like Google Analytics, we want that shit to happen as soon as we can, because we want that setup to happen, because we want Google Analytics to be told that this page load happened, because that's part of the analytics we're collecting. So I want that at the top probably. But again, these are all trade-offs that you should know about the trade-offs for functionality. You don't need to worry about these trade-offs for page performance optimization, because that's just something that you can learn after you get all these basics down. After you know how to get shit to work, we can learn how to optimize it. All right. I'll say a couple of things about CSS frameworks, but we are out of time. Whose question was about CSS?
Yeah.
It was yours? You should learn CSS is the first thing I'll say. Learn CSS. When you feel like you have a decent handle on CSS, you don't have to wait, but you know, like anything, if you learn like if you were to learn like CoffeeScript or TypeScript, those are languages that compile to JavaScript and then run in the browser. If you don't know JavaScript, you're gonna have a hard time debugging that. Same thing here. If we use a framework like sass and scss, which are the same thing, or less, which is a different framework, these things are slightly different CSS syntaxes, and if you learn those without learning the one they compile into, you're probably gonna have a hard time debugging those things. But that's more so true for JavaScript or language-based compiling than it is for CSS. This stuff's not, CSS is complicated in what it does when you tell it to change HTML and draw pixels on the screen. It's pretty complicated, but the formatting of CSS is just a selector and some styles, right? So it's not that complex. SCSS and Sass and less all add nested style definitions, which all compile to just the long form version of, does that part make sense? Of the CSS nesting?
No.
So, okay. So in CSS, we can say like, you know, the body element has a background color of red, right? We can say like any class, any element with the class, you know, awesome gets, gets, you know, font size 200% or whatever, right? We can do this, right? But we can't do like, okay, an element inside of awesome that has, you know, the frog class is color green, right? We can't nest these things. And that's something that's really nice. If we want to say anything that's inside of awesome, I've got to duplicate it, right? So I find when I have vanilla CSS, I'll make something like the sign up form, and then I'll give that a style, and then I'll say, okay, inside the sign up form we have the first name. Oh my God, input.
Don't you need a greater than sign in between to stay inside?
This is direct descendant. This is any descendant. That's what space means, is any descendant, right? So I find myself having to do some duplication here, where like if I want to change this class name, you know, I've got to come in here and find them all and change them all, right? So in Sass, for example, it'll let you just come in here and nest these things. So those mean the same thing. They're not color highlighted here very well, but we get this nesting thing, which is super awesome. CSS should have had this a long time ago. So if you don't understand how CSS works, then this is going to be really hard for you to understand, because it's like a layer of complexity on top of it. So once you feel like, and you probably are already there, that you understand enough CSS to write a selector with some styles, then it's totally fine to go use one of these transpilers to write CSS with some extra syntactic sugar and then compile down to normal CSS. So yeah, use it.
So it does go through a transpiler that converts it back to.
Yeah, so if I take this and I pipe it to SCSS, you'll see that it comes out with some CSS that is, you know, formatted in a little bit of a wonky way, but it does that explosion that I did manually.
Cool. It's almost like Babel for
In that they're both transpilers. They convert one thing to another thing, but that's really all they share in terms of like what's going on. As far as I understand, maybe they share some other things, but the cognitive part is that like transpiling takes code in one syntax and turns it into code into some other syntax. All right, that's all the time we have, folks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.